My name is Victoria, and I'm 29 years old. For most of my life, I was the good daughter, the reliable one, the built-in safety net my family reached for whenever something broke, whenever money ran short, whenever someone else needed saving. Then, one night, over a plate of roast chicken, I finally understood that my love had never been treated like a gift. It had been treated like currency, and they had no intention of ever paying it back. This is the story of how I stopped paying. Before I tell you how everything flipped, like and subscribe and drop a comment telling me where you are watching from. The night my old life ended, the house smelled like rosemary and garlic. My mother Clara believed a good roast chicken could solve almost anything. It was her answer to bad news, her way of celebrating good news, and her default setting for a quiet Sunday evening. The whole house was filled with that warm, comforting scent, the kind of smell that had always meant family and safety to me. But that night it felt like a lie. I had been the one who prepped the chicken, rubbing the spices under the skin exactly the way my mother liked it. I had peeled the potatoes, set them to boil, and arranged the green beans in the steamer. My sister Lily had been upstairs on the phone with a friend, her laughter floating down the staircase like tiny bells. My father Mark was in the living room, the low murmur of the television the only sign that he was home. It looked like a scene from the scrapbook of a perfect family, and I was the invisible artist who had made it all happen. Dinner was served at 6 o'clock sharp, just like always. My father came to the table with his eyes still glued to some game on his phone. Lily bounced into her chair, her blonde hair swishing over her shoulders. She was 2 years younger than me, but she had a glow about her that made everyone treat her like the center of the universe. Lily reached for the chicken and told my mother it looked amazing. My mother waved a dismissive hand and said that I had helped. It was not a compliment. It was a statement of fact as casual as saying the sky was blue. I had helped. I always helped. I sat in my usual chair, the one with the slight wobble that no one else wanted. I served myself a small portion of potatoes and a few green beans. Conversation moved around me in that familiar current I was never quite part of. They talked about my father's golf game, about a sale at the department store where my mother wanted to buy a new handbag, and about Lily's friend who had just gotten engaged. I listened and nodded at the right moments, a ghost at my own family's table. Then my mother set down her wineglass, leaving a perfect red ring on the lace doily, and the entire world tilted on its axis. She said lightly, almost breezily, that she had booked the tickets for the trip. My heart gave a little jump. We had been talking about a family vacation for months, a 2-week trip to Italy to celebrate my parents' 30th wedding anniversary. I had been saving for it, setting aside extra cash from my job as an office administrator, imagining myself standing in front of the Colosseum, finally doing something beautiful with my family. I smiled and asked when we were leaving. My father grunted from behind his phone. Lily's eyes lit up, but it was my mother who delivered the blow with the casual precision of a surgeon. She called me sweetie, using the word like a soft cushion for the punch she was about to throw, and told me they had run the numbers and simply could not afford 2 tickets. They were only taking my sister that year. My fork hit my plate with a clatter that sounded impossibly loud in the sudden silence. For a second, the table blurred in front of me. The smell of rosemary became thick and suffocating. I repeated the words back to her because they made no sense. 2 tickets. There were 4 of us. My mother sighed, the kind of sigh she used when she thought I was being difficult. She explained that she meant 2 tickets for the kids because obviously she and my father were going. It was their anniversary. Then she looked at Lily and smiled a warm, genuine smile I had not seen directed at me in years, and said Lily deserved it after everything she had been through. Everything she had been through. That was their favorite phrase. It meant Lily's recent dramatic breakup with a boyfriend who had lasted all of 3 months. It meant Lily quitting her part-time job because her boss had been unreasonable. In my family's language, Lily's minor inconveniences were tragedies. My major sacrifices were expectations. I looked at my father, hoping for an ally or even the smallest flicker of support. He did not look up from his phone. He only cleared his throat and told me I was an adult. I was 29 years old. I could take my own vacation any time I wanted. His words hung in the air, cold and final. And he was right. I was an adult. I was an adult who had given them thousands of dollars from my savings to fix the roof the year before. I was an adult who had co-signed Lily's car loan when her credit was rejected. I was an adult who paid for groceries more often than not because my father's pension did not stretch as far these days. I was an adult, And somehow, my money was their money. My time was their time. My energy was their right. But my seat on a plane was my own responsibility. They went back to their conversation as if nothing had happened. They talked about luggage, about the direct flight my mother had managed to find, and about how excited they were to see the Amalfi Coast. Each word felt like a tiny shard of glass embedding itself in my chest. Then Lily looked at me from across the table. There was no malice in her eyes, only a thoughtless, casual cruelty that somehow hurt even more. She grinned her perfect, dazzling smile and told me not to worry because she would send pictures. My father chuckled. My mother smiled at her fondly. And in that moment, something inside me broke. It was not loud. It was not dramatic. It was a quiet, clean snap, like a thread that had been pulled tight for too long, finally giving way. For my entire life, I had been trying to earn my place at that table. I had worked harder, given more, sacrificed pieces of myself, and molded myself into whatever shape my family needed. I bought the expensive birthday gifts. I remembered the anniversaries. I mediated arguments. I paid bills, fixed problems, swallowed disappointment, and asked for nothing in return, hoping that one day they would finally see me. I had believed that one day my love and effort would be enough. But sitting there, listening to them laugh, I finally understood the truth. Love in that house was not a right. It was a privilege handed out to the chosen one. And I was not the chosen one. I never would be. I was just the foundation, the silent, sturdy thing they all stood on, and they had forgotten I was even there. A strange calm washed over me. The hurt was still there, a deep, cold ache in my chest, but beside it was something new and sharp and clear. I picked up my fork and took a bite of the chicken I had cooked. It tasted like nothing. I smiled, a small, quiet smile that did not reach my eyes, and told them it sounded wonderful. I said I hoped they all had the best time. They accepted my surrender without question. They did not notice the emptiness in my voice or the resolve hardening in my gaze. They only saw what they had always seen. Good, reliable Victoria, accepting her place on the sidelines once again. I finished my meal in silence. I cleared the plates just like I always did. But as I stood at the sink with hot water running over my hands, I was not thinking about revenge. Revenge was messy and loud, and it would still keep me tied to them. No, what I was planning was much quieter. I was planning for freedom. I had not always known I was invisible. Or maybe I had always been invisible and I just had not understood it yet. When you are a child, you do not see the subtle currents of favoritism. You only know that your sister's drawings get the center spot on the refrigerator, while yours are tucked away at the side. You only know that when Lily cried, she was comforted, and when I cried, I was told to be strong for her. I learned early that my role was to be steady, responsible, and easy. I was the one who did not cause trouble. The real shift began when I was 19. My father lost his job at the manufacturing plant where he had worked for 20 years. The factory was downsizing, and his position was eliminated. He came home on a Tuesday, carrying his belongings in a cardboard box with a look of stunned defeat on his face. The house, which had always felt so secure, suddenly filled with a thick, heavy silence. Panic had a metallic taste in the air. At the time, I was in my first year of community college, working part-time at a local cafe to pay for my books and gas. That week, without anyone asking me, I went to my manager and told her I could take any extra shifts available. I started working mornings before class and closing shifts at night. Sleep became a luxury. My studies suffered, but the sight of my weekly paycheck, the one I endorsed and handed directly to my mother, felt more important. I was helping. I was contributing. I was saving us. My mother would take the money with tears in her eyes and tell me I was such a good daughter. She would say she did not know what they would do without me. Those words became my drug. I chased that feeling of being needed, of being essential. I dropped out of college the next semester and told myself it was temporary. I got a second job on weekends. I convinced myself that my sacrifice was the glue holding my family together. My father eventually found a new job, but it paid less. And by then the pattern had already been set. My income was no longer my own. It was part of the family pot, and my family was very good at spending. When I was 22, my mother decided she wanted to refinance the mortgage to pay off some credit card debt they had accumulated. The bank told them they did not have enough equity, but the loan officer suggested that a cash payment of about $8,000 would solve the problem. That night, my mother sat me down at the kitchen table, the same table where years later I would be uninvited from my own family vacation. She twisted a napkin in her hands and told me she knew it was a lot to ask, but it would be such a help. She said it was only temporary, of course. Once they got the new rate, they would be able to pay me back within a year. She promised. I had exactly $8,421 in my savings account. It was every dollar I had managed to squirrel away over 3 years. It was my dream of going back to school. It was my escape hatch. I looked at her worried face, at the stress lines around her eyes, and I thought about the house I had grown up in. I thought about being the good daughter. Then I told her okay. My voice was barely above a whisper. I transferred the money the next morning. They never paid me back. When I brought it up a year later, my father got defensive. He asked if I did not think they would repay me if they could. He said things were still tight. My mother told me I was putting unnecessary pressure on them. It was easier to let it go. It was easier to be the good daughter. Meanwhile, Lily floated through life on a cloud of my money. She never had to learn the hard lesson of a budget. When she wanted the newest iPhone, she did not save for it. She came to me and said her old one was so slow, then asked if I could help her out. She always promised she would pay me back from her next paycheck. Her next paycheck would come and go, spent on clothes or nights out with friends, and the debt would be forgotten by everyone, except me. The biggest betrayal came when she turned 21. She wanted a new car, something reliable to get her to her classes at the 4-year university I was indirectly funding. Her credit was non-existent. The dealership would not approve the loan without a cosigner. My parents could not do it because their debt-to-income ratio was too high after the mortgage refinance. So every pair of eyes turned to me. My father told me it was just a signature. He said Lily would make the payments and that it would help her build credit. I knew it was a terrible idea. Every financial instinct I had screamed no. Co-signing a loan for someone with no history of financial responsibility was foolish, and I tried to refuse. I told my father I did not know, that it was a big risk. That was the first time I saw the switch flip. The warm, appreciative family disappeared, replaced by something cold and hard. My mother muttered the word selfish under her breath, just loudly enough for me to hear. After everything they had done for me, they had given me a roof over my head, yes, but it was a roof I was now helping to pay for. They had fed me, but I was now buying the groceries. They had clothed me, but I had not bought myself a new coat in 3 winters. The accusations stung because it was sharp and unfair. Guilt, their most effective weapon, flooded through my system. I was being selfish. My sister needed me. So I signed the papers. For the first 6 months, Lily made the payments. Then she missed one. I got a call from the bank. I spoke to Lily, and she promised she had simply forgotten and would catch up. The next month, she missed another. Soon, the payments were coming directly out of my account every month to keep my own credit from being destroyed. When I confronted her, she cried. She said her new job had cut her hours, and she just could not afford it. My parents told me to be more understanding. My father reminded me she was my sister, as if that explained everything. Over 10 years, my life became a series of quiet sacrifices. I was the emergency fund, the lender who never called in a debt, the silent partner in their comfort. With every yes, I earned their conditional approval. They called me responsible, generous, the family rock. I was a good daughter, but if I ever hesitated, if I ever hinted that I might have needs of my own, I became selfish. I became ungrateful. I became difficult. It took me a decade to see the transaction for what it was. I was not giving to my family out of love. I was paying for their affection, and the price kept going up. I was not a daughter. I was not a sister. I was their safety net, woven from my own broken dreams. And a safety net is only noticed when it is gone. The night after that dinner, the quiet in the house felt different. It was not peaceful. It was heavy, weighted down with unspoken truths. The leftover roast chicken sat in the refrigerator, but the thought of it made my stomach turn. My parents and Lily were in the living room watching a movie, and their laughter came muffled through the walls. It sounded foreign and distant, like it was coming from a stranger's house. I sat on the worn couch in my small bedroom, a room that felt more like a dorm than part of a family home. Around me were the artifacts of a life on hold. Stacks of books I had meant to read, a second-hand laptop, bills neatly piled on my desk. My own bills, car insurance, my phone bill, the student loan payments I was still making for the 2 semesters of college I had managed to complete. My phone felt cold in my hand. I opened my banking app and hovered my thumb over the screen. I did not know exactly what I was looking for, but I felt a magnetic pull toward the truth, no matter how ugly. I navigated to my transaction history. I set the date range back 10 years and hit enter. The screen refreshed and a list began to populate. It scrolled on, a digital river of my own financial bleeding. October 2015. Transfer to my mother, $5,800. Reason? The leaky roof. January 2016. Transfer to Lily, $300. Reason? College textbooks. 2017. Credit card payment, $1,200. My father's card, the one he had sworn was a one-time emergency. I kept scrolling until my thumb began to ache. Each line item was a memory. Each number was a small surrender. There was the $8,000 for the mortgage, a stark and glaring number. There were the monthly car payments for Lily's loan, an unrelenting rhythm of $350 over and over again. There were hundreds of smaller transactions. $100 for groceries, $50 for my father's prescription copay, $200 for the family cell phone plan that was in my name because my credit was the only one good enough to get it without a deposit. The numbers blurred together into a long, painful story of my 20s. It was a decade of my life quantified in dollars and cents, a decade where I had traded my future for their present. I saw the deposits from my paychecks steady and reliable. Then I saw the withdrawals, a constant draining outflow that always left me hovering just above zero. I connected my laptop to my old printer, the one I had bought for Lily when she was in high school. The machine whirred to life and began spitting out page after page of my bank statements. The pile grew on the floor beside me. It felt like I was printing out my own ghost. When the printer finally went silent, I sat on the floor with the stack of papers. With a pen and a calculator, I began to add. I worked methodically, my hands steady. This was not an act of anger. It was an audit of my life. I circled every transfer to my parents, every payment made on Lily's behalf, every household bill I had covered that was not truly mine. The numbers climbed. 10,000, 30,000, 70,000. The air in the room grew thin. My breathing became shallow. A cold knot of nausea tightened in my stomach. This was the money I could have used for a down payment on a small condo. This was the money that could have finished my degree and helped me get a better job. This was the money that could have paid for my own vacation to Italy or anywhere else I wanted to go. This was the price of being the good daughter. When I finally wrote down the grand total, I stared at it until the number burned itself into my memory. $112,419. I leaned back against my bed with the papers spread around me like fallen leaves. That number was not just money. It was 10 years of my life. 10 years of saying yes when I should have said no. 10 years of believing their empty promises that they would pay me back. It was physical proof of my invisibility. They had not stolen it from me in one grand heist. They had bled it from me, drop by drop, day by day, calling it love, calling it family, calling it my duty. I thought of my father's words at dinner. I was an adult. I could take my own vacation. They had made sure of it. They had taken my wings and then told me I was free to fly. The hypocrisy was so deep it was almost absurd. I did not cry. The time for tears was over. My grief had been replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I stood up and found an old, expandable folder in the back of my closet. I began organizing the papers. First came the bank statements, highlighted and dated. Then I went through my email and printed every message where I had agreed to send money. I found the loan agreement I had co-signed for Lily's car. I found the receipts for the major appliances in the house, the new refrigerator we bought 2 years earlier, the washer and dryer, the 65-inch television in the living room. All of them had been purchased with my credit card. Another temporary expense they had never repaid. I placed every piece of paper into that folder. On the front, I took a black marker and wrote one word in clear, bold letters: reality. That folder was more than a collection of documents. It was my resignation letter. It was my closing argument in a case I had been losing my entire life. It was my armor, because I knew them. I knew that when I finally walked away, they would paint me as the villain. They would call me ungrateful, selfish, a monster who had abandoned her family. But that folder held the truth. It proved that I had not abandoned them. I had funded them. And my service was officially over. I had paid for my family in full. Now I was finally going to pay myself. They left on a Wednesday morning. The air was crisp with the promise of autumn, and the sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue. It was the kind of perfect day that made you want to start something new. For them, it was a vacation. For me, it was a revolution. I stood at the kitchen window sipping my coffee and watched them load the car. There were 3 large suitcases, my mother's garish floral tote bag, and a sense of excitement vibrating off all of them in waves. My father directed the loading of the trunk with military precision. Lily chattered endlessly about the things she planned to buy. My mother buzzed around doing a final check of her purse, sunglasses perched on top of her head. They were so caught up in their adventure that they barely noticed me. I was just part of the scenery, the quiet fixture in the house they were so eager to leave behind. My mother came back inside for a moment and announced they were off. She gave me a quick, distracted hug that felt more like a brush-off. She told me to keep the houseplants alive and not forget to bring in the mail. Lily stood in the doorway and playfully warned me not to touch her room, as if I had any interest in her sanctuary of fast fashion and half-empty makeup palettes. I told her I would not. My voice was even and calm. I met her eyes for a moment, and for one split second I wondered whether she saw anything different in me. But she just smiled, her mind already 3,000 miles away, somewhere over the Atlantic. I told them to have a safe flight. That was the last thing I ever said to them in that house. I watched the car back out of the driveway. They laughed and waved, and I raised one hand in a final quiet goodbye. They thought they were leaving me behind for 2 weeks. They had no idea they were leaving me behind forever. The moment their car turned the corner and disappeared from view, the silence they left behind was vast and absolute. For a few minutes I just stood there and let it wash over me. It did not feel empty. It felt clean. By noon, my new life was in motion. I had spent the last 2 weeks planning every detail with the quiet efficiency of a general preparing for battle. I made a phone call to a number I had found online. The company called itself Silent Separations. Their website was discreet, and their services were tailored to people leaving difficult situations quickly and quietly. They specialized in logistics, not judgment. When a calm voice answered, I said my name and reminded them we had spoken the week before. Then I told them I was ready. 2 hours later, a large, unmarked moving truck pulled up to the curb. 2 men in simple gray uniforms got out and came to the door. They were polite, professional, and asked no questions. I had already paid for their services in full online with the last of my savings. I met them at the door and handed them the folder labeled Reality. I explained that everything I was taking was backed up by a receipt in that folder. The items were mine. I had purchased them. My name was on the paperwork. The older of the 2 men, whose name was Dave, opened the folder and glanced through the first few pages. He nodded slowly with a look of understanding on his face. He had seen this before. He closed the folder, handed it back to me, and told me to just point. They would do the rest. And so it began. They moved with quiet, methodical grace. The first thing to go was the 65-inch television from the living room, then the couch and armchairs, then the coffee table I had assembled myself. Piece by piece, the life I had subsidized was dismantled and carried out the front door. We moved through the house room by room. From the kitchen, they took the new refrigerator, the microwave, and the expensive coffee machine I had bought my mother for Christmas. From the laundry room, they took the washer and dryer set I was still making payments on. I left their old, worn-out furniture. I only took what was mine, what I had paid for. The house began to look hollow, like a skeleton picked clean. The rooms echoed with our footsteps. When the movers reached Lily's room, I stopped them at the door and told them nothing in there. I had bought the laptop on her desk and the bed she slept in, but I left them. This was not about punishment. It was about severing financial ties. Those things were gifts, and I let them go. I was taking back the items that had been presented as shared family property, the things that had blurred the line between contribution and ownership. Finally, all that remained were the few boxes I had packed for myself: my clothes, my books, my personal belongings. The movers loaded them onto the truck last. They would drive them to a storage unit in a city 3 states away, a city I had already chosen for my new beginning. My own car was packed with only a suitcase and a cooler of snacks for the road. The house was barren. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in empty spaces. It looked strange and unfamiliar. It was no longer a home. It was just a building. I walked to the kitchen counter, the only surface left, and took out a single sheet of paper and an envelope. With a steady hand, I wrote my final message. I told my mother, my father, and Lily that everything I took was mine. Every item had been paid for by me, and I had the receipts to prove it. Anything that was truly theirs was still there, for years. I walked outside for the last time into the bright afternoon sun. Dave and his partner were closing the back of the truck. He gave me a simple nod and wished me good luck. I thanked him. Then I got into my car, started the engine, and pulled away from the curb. I did not look in the rearview mirror. I did not look back. There was nothing left for me there. The first 3 days of my new life were spent on the road. I drove through rolling hills and sprawling flatlands, through crowded cities and empty highways. With every mile I put between myself and that hollowed-out house, another layer of weight I had not even realized I was carrying began to peel away. I listened to music I had not heard in years. I ate at greasy roadside diners and slept in cheap, anonymous motels. For the first time, I felt the exhilarating and terrifying thrill of being completely and utterly on my own. I arrived in a small mountain town where the air was thin and clean and the sky seemed impossibly large. I had rented a small furnished cabin online without ever seeing it in person. It was tiny, with only a bedroom, a small kitchen, and a living area with a stone fireplace. But as I stood in the doorway, breathing in the faint scent of pine and wood smoke, I knew it was perfect. It was mine. The silence there was not heavy or oppressive. It was peaceful, filled with the gentle sound of wind moving through the trees. I spent the next 2 weeks settling in. I retrieved my belongings from the storage unit and slowly began making the cabin feel like home. I started my remote job, the one I had secured weeks earlier. I created a new routine for myself, one that did not revolve around anyone else's needs or demands. I woke with the sun, drank coffee on the small wooden porch, and watched deer wander through the yard. In the evenings, I read the books I'd always meant to read. The anxiety of waiting for my family to return was a low hum in the back of my mind, but it was drowned out by the overwhelming feeling of peace. I was breathing again. The storm broke on a Tuesday, exactly 2 weeks after I had left. My phone, which had been blissfully silent, buzzed on the kitchen counter before the sun had even risen. It was a text from my mother. She wanted to know what I had done. She said the house was empty. She demanded to know where everything was and told me to call her right now. I read the message and felt a strange detachment. The panic in her words seemed to belong to someone else's life. I put the phone back down and continued making my coffee. A few minutes later, it buzzed again. This time it was my father. His message was blunt and threatening. He called it theft. He said they were on their way to the police station. He gave me 1 hour to call and explain myself before they filed a report. Then Lily texted, full of the dramatic flair I knew so well. She said she could not believe me. She said I had ruined their home. She said my mother was having a breakdown and asked how I could be so cruel. The texts kept coming, a barrage of anger, confusion, and accusations. They called me a thief, a monster, an ungrateful child. Each message confirmed that I had done the right thing. They were not sad that I was gone. They were furious that their things were gone. Their comfort had been disrupted. Their easy life had been dismantled. That was my crime. I did not reply. The note I left had said everything that needed to be said. The truth does not need a defense. I turned my phone on silent, placed it in a drawer, and went for a walk in the cool morning air. By afternoon, I knew I had to face the legal threat. I took a deep breath and called the lawyer I had consulted 2 weeks earlier. He specialized in domestic and financial disputes, and I had paid him a retainer for this exact moment. When he answered, his voice was calm and professional. He said hello and guessed they were home. I told him they were, and that they were threatening to file a police report for theft. He replied calmly that they already had. He had received a call from a detective named Miller about an hour earlier. My stomach dropped, but he continued with the faintest hint of amusement in his voice. He had emailed the detective scanned copies of the receipts and bank statements I had provided, the ones from my folder, the ones with my name attached to every single purchase. He had explained that I had simply reclaimed my own property, which I was legally entitled to do. I held my breath and waited. Then he told me there had been a long pause on the other end of the line. After that, the detective informed him that it was a civil matter, not a criminal one, and that the case was closed. Case closed. The words echoed through my little cabin. A wave of relief so powerful it made my knees weak washed over me. I sank into a chair with the phone still pressed to my ear, and then a sound I had not heard from myself in a long time rose out of my chest. It began as a shaky exhale, then became a quiet, disbelieving chuckle. Then it grew into full, unrestrained laughter. I laughed until tears streamed down my face. But they were not tears of sadness or anger. They were tears of pure release. It felt like finally being able to breathe after holding my breath for a decade underwater. The weight was not just lifted, it was gone. Their threats were empty. The power they had held over me had been an illusion, one I had helped maintain for far too long. And now, I had shattered it. In my small mountain cabin, miles away from the mess I had left behind, I laughed. For the first time in my life, the sound was entirely my own. It was the sound of freedom. 3 days passed after the lawyer's phone call. 3 days of profound, undisturbed quiet. The initial explosive relief settled into a deep and steady calm. The constant threat I had lived under for a decade, the threat of their disapproval, their anger, their disappointment, had been revealed as nothing more than noise. Their power was gone because I had taken it back. I was beginning to learn the rhythms of my new life. I knew how the morning sun hit the porch. I knew the call of the blue jay in the pine tree outside my window. And I knew the simple, grounding pleasure of making a pot of coffee that was entirely for me. I was sitting on the porch with my laptop open but ignored and a half-empty mug steaming beside me when my phone buzzed. I had taken it out of the drawer, but I kept it on silent now. It was a tool I controlled, not the other way around. I glanced at the screen. It was Lily. My first instinct was to ignore it, let it go to voicemail, delete the notification, and pretend it had never happened. What more was there to say? The legal battle was over. The financial ties were severed. But something made me hesitate. Maybe it was a faint whisper of the sister I once thought I had, the little girl whose hair I used to braid. Maybe it was morbid curiosity about what came after the anger. Did they have a new strategy? A new angle of attack? I decided to answer, not out of obligation, but out of a clinical desire for data. I needed to know whether this chapter was truly over. I let it ring 3 more times. I took a slow, calming breath of cool mountain air. Then I answered and placed the phone on the table on speaker. I did not want it close to my ear. I did not want her voice inside my head. I said hello, my voice neutral. For a moment there was only the sound of her shaky breathing. Then she said my old nickname. Her voice sounded nothing like the texts. The righteous fury was gone, replaced by something thin and trembling. It was the voice she used as a child when she wanted something, the voice that had always worked on my parents. It no longer worked on me. I told her my name was Victoria and asked what she wanted. She whispered that they had come home to nothing. The house was empty. My mother had been crying for days and would not come out of her bedroom. My father was sitting in the empty living room, staring at the wall. Then she said I had done this. The accusation was there, but it was limp and exhausted. She was reciting a script, trying to activate the guilt that had been my primary programming for 29 years. But the code had been rewritten. I told her I left what was theirs and took what was mine. I looked out at the vast sweep of green trees before me, a landscape that held no judgment. Lily started crying about the couch, the television, the refrigerator. She asked how they were supposed to live, and said I had taken everything. I told her the couch was the one I bought when our mother's back was hurting and she needed more support. The television was the one I bought because our father wanted a bigger screen for his games. The refrigerator was the one I bought with my credit card when the old one died and no one else had money for a new one. I reminded her that I had receipts for all of them. They had never been theirs to begin with. They had only been another loan they never intended to repay. A choked sound came from the other end of the line. She was trying to process a reality that had never been allowed to exist in that house. In her world, things simply appeared when they were needed. She never had to ask where they came from. Then she whispered the question she thought I could not answer. How could I do this to them? We were family. The word hung in the air between us, stretched thin and meaningless. Family. For a decade, that word had been a cage, and I had dutifully locked myself inside it every night. Now, from the outside, I could see it for what it was. I said her name and told her what family was not. Family was not watching one child work herself to the bone so the other could live carefree. Family was not draining a daughter's savings account and then calling her selfish for wanting a future of her own. Family was not offering love and support as a reward for financial compliance. I told her they had not treated me like family. They had treated me like an ATM, and they were angry because it was finally out of cash. The silence that followed was heavy and absolute. I had taken her word, her final weapon, and dismantled it piece by piece. She had nothing left to fight with. The usual tactics, tears, guilt, accusations all slid right off me. Then, in the smallest voice I had ever heard from her, stripped of all its usual confidence, she asked the real question buried beneath all the anger over the furniture. She asked if I hated her. I thought about it. I searched myself for that feeling. I thought of the missed payments, the broken promises, the casual cruelty of that last dinner. I felt the ache of years of being overlooked. But hate? Hate was a fire. It required energy, passion, engagement. What I felt for her was almost nothing. It was a quiet, empty space. The part of me that had once been reserved for my sister had become as hollowed out as the house I left behind. Finally, I told her the truth. I did not hate her. I heard her exhale a small gasp that might have been relief, but I was not finished. I told her I had simply stopped financing her. Then I ended the call. I did not slam the phone down. I simply pressed the red icon on the screen. I picked up my coffee mug, took a sip of the now lukewarm coffee, and turned my attention back to the mountains. There was no anger, there were no tears. There was just peace, vast and quiet and unshakable. The last thread had been cut. The following week, my new life continued to take shape. The call with Lily had been a final, necessary amputation. The phantom limb of my old life still ached sometimes, a flicker of guilt when I bought a new sweater, a moment of loneliness in the evenings. But the feeling was fading, replaced by a growing sense of wholeness I had never known before. I was learning to enjoy the sound of my own thoughts, to trust my own instincts, to be my own companion. My mail was being forwarded from my old address to a P.O. box I had set up in town. One afternoon, while sorting through the usual junk mail and a few bills, I saw a plain white envelope addressed to me in my father's angry, slanted handwriting. My stomach gave the familiar reflexive clench, the conditioned response of a daughter who had spent her whole life bracing for her father's disapproval. But then the feeling passed as quickly as it had come. I was no longer that daughter. I took the letter back to my cabin, sat at my small kitchen table, and opened it. Not with dread, but with detached curiosity. I was no longer a participant in their drama. I was an audience member watching the final act. The letter was short, as I knew it would be. My father was not a man of many words, especially when emotions were involved. His primary language was anger, and he was fluent in it. He wrote that he did not know what I thought I had accomplished with my stunt, but that I had made the biggest mistake of my life. He said I had thrown away my family for a pile of furniture. He said they had given me everything, and that I had repaid them with a disgusting, selfish act of betrayal. He said my mother was sick with grief over what I had done. He warned me not to expect them to come crawling to me, and not to expect their help when my new life fell apart, because it would. He wrote that I was not as strong as I thought I was, that I had made my choice and would have to live with it. He said I would regret it when I was alone, because they were the only ones who had ever truly cared about me, and I had thrown it all away. He signed it Mark, not Dad. Mark. It was a formal, cold dismissal, a final verdict from the judge who had presided over my life. I read the letter twice, letting the words wash over me. The old me would have been devastated. The old me would have cried, would have felt the crushing weight of his condemnation, would have believed every toxic word. The old me would have seen that letter as proof of my own failure. But the woman reading it now saw something else entirely. She saw a desperate last attempt at control. He was trying to use his most trusted weapon, fear. The fear of being alone. For my entire life, that had been the unspoken threat. Be good, or you will be alone. Do what we ask, or you will be alone. Do not upset us, or you will be alone. I looked up from the letter and out the window. A gentle rain had started to fall, tapping softly against the roof. The trees outside were deep, vibrant green, alive and breathing. Inside my cabin was warm and safe. It was filled with my books, my music, my peace. And then I understood the profound irony of his words. I had never been more alone than I had been while living in that house, surrounded by the three of them. I was alone at the dinner table while they talked around me. I was alone on my birthdays when they gave me cash and a card, while Lily received thoughtful, expensive gifts. I was alone late at night, worrying about the bills I was paying for them. That house had not been a home. It had been a crowded, noisy island of isolation. My loneliness there had been a constant, aching presence. Here in my cabin, I was in solitude, but I was not alone. For the first time, I was with myself. I was getting to know the person who had been buried under years of obligation and sacrifice. I was learning what she liked, what she dreamed of, what made her laugh. I was finally my own companion, and I was discovering that I was pretty good company. A slow smile spread across my face. It was not a smile of triumph or revenge. It was a smile of pure freedom. My father thought loneliness was my punishment. He had no idea it was my reward. I folded the letter neatly and placed it back in the envelope. I did not tear it up. It felt important somehow. It was the last piece of evidence, the closing statement from their side of the argument. And it proved my entire case. It was final, undeniable proof that I had made the right choice. Their love was conditional. Their care was a transaction. Their family was a prison. And I, for the first time in my life, was not alone. I was free. My new life began quietly. It was not a sudden cinematic transformation. It was a slow, gentle unfurling, like a fern in spring. The first few months were about establishing new rhythms, new routines built around my needs instead of everyone else's. The seasons changed outside my window. The vibrant greens of summer slowly gave way to fiery oranges and deep reds of autumn. With each passing day, I felt myself changing too. The centerpiece of my new life was my morning coffee. In my old life, mornings had been a frantic rush of making sure everyone else was taken care of. I made sure my father's coffee was just right. I made sure Lily had a clean work shirt. I made sure the dishwasher was unloaded before my mother came downstairs. Now my mornings were a sacred ritual of stillness. I ground the beans, boiled the water, and poured it slowly, breathing in the rich, dark aroma. I took my mug to the porch and sat there, watching the mist burn off the mountains. It was a small thing, a simple cup of coffee, but it was a daily declaration of independence. It was mine. My work, which had once been only a means to an end, only the source of funds I funneled into my family's endless needs, became a source of pride and focus. Working remotely, free from the constant stress and interruptions of home, I discovered that I was good at my job. Really good. I took on new projects. My confidence grew. 3 months in, my boss called and offered me a promotion and a significant raise. I accepted with a clear, steady voice. After I hung up, I felt a quiet joy that was entirely my own. It was a success they could not take credit for. Validation earned on my own terms. The most profound change was financial. For the first time in my adult life, my paycheck was mine. All of it. I created a real budget with categories for savings, retirement, and an emergency fund. I watched with near disbelief as my savings account, a barren wasteland for a decade, began to grow. First $1,000, then $5,000, then $10,000. It was a safety net I was weaving for myself, thread by thread. One day I walked past a store in town and saw a beautiful deep blue winter coat in the window. The old Victoria would have admired it, calculated the cost, and walked away. The familiar voice of guilt would have whispered that it was too extravagant, that the money could be better used elsewhere. The new Victoria walked into the store, tried it on, and bought it without a second thought. Walking out into the crisp autumn air wrapped in the warmth of my new coat, I felt no guilt. I felt a simple, profound rightness. It was more than a coat. It was an act of self-care, a quiet acknowledgement that I was worthy of warmth and comfort. But rebuilding was not just about solitude and financial stability. It was about learning how to connect with people on healthy terms. Loneliness still crept in sometimes, a quiet echo in the still evenings. I knew I could not live forever on my mountain without human connection, so I took small, tentative steps. I started visiting the local farmers market every Saturday and making small talk with the vendors. I joined the town library and struck up a conversation with the librarian over our shared love of mystery novels. My biggest step was joining a local hiking group that met on Sunday mornings. The first time I went, I was nervous. My social muscles had atrophied from years of disuse. But the people were kind and welcoming. They were a mix of ages and backgrounds drawn together by love for the mountains. They did not ask about my family or my past. They talked about trails, wildlife, and the simple joy of being outdoors. One of my fellow hikers was a woman named Sarah, a retired teacher with a kind smile and wise eyes. We fell into an easy rhythm and often walked together. One day, she asked a casual question about my plans for the upcoming holidays. A jolt of panic went through me. I stammered that I did not really have any plans, that my family and I were not in touch. I braced for pity, for awkward questions, for judgment. Instead, Sarah simply nodded and said that sometimes the family you choose is more important than the family you are born into. Then she told me that a few people from the group who did not have local family gathered for a potluck, and that I was more than welcome to join them. Her casual acceptance, her respect for my unspoken boundaries felt like a revelation. There was no judgment, no pressure, just a simple, kind invitation. It was a type of interaction I had never experienced before. I began to understand that peace was not just the absence of my family's drama. Peace was the presence of respect. It was the presence of boundaries. It was the presence of people who saw me as a person, not a resource. As winter approached and the first snow began to dust the mountain peaks, I looked around my small, warm cabin, the place that had become my sanctuary and my home. I thought about the quiet life I was building, brick by brick. It turns out peace is not given to you. You do not inherit it, and you cannot buy it. You have to earn it. You have to fight for it. And just like I had earned every single dollar they took for granted, I was finally earning a life that was truly, completely, and peacefully my own. Almost a year had passed since I drove away from that hollowed-out house. A year of quiet mornings, challenging work, and peaceful evenings. A year of building a life from the ground up, a life that fit me perfectly. The mountains had become my home. Their steady, silent presence became a constant source of strength. The woman who had fled that day felt like a distant relative now, someone whose story I knew, but whose pain I no longer wore like a second skin. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, I was clearing out my personal email inbox, deleting junk mail and unsubscribing from newsletters. My eyes scanned the list of senders, and one name made me pause. Lily. The subject line was only my name. Victoria. My finger hovered over the delete button. My immediate gut reaction was to erase it, to pretend it never existed. I had worked so hard to build my fortress of peace, and I was terrified to let anything from my past breach its walls. I owed them nothing, not even the courtesy of reading a message. What could she possibly have to say that mattered now? An apology? A new demand? Another accusation? But curiosity stronger than I expected won. This felt different from the desperate phone call. A year was a long time. Part of me needed to know how the story had ended. With a deep breath, as if bracing for impact, I clicked it open. The email was short. Lily's writing style, usually littered with emojis and exclamation points, was simple and direct. She wrote that she did not know whether I would even read it, and that she would not blame me if I deleted it. She said a lot had happened since I left. My parents were the same. They were still angry. They talked about what I did as if it had happened yesterday. They had bought new furniture on a credit card, and my father was working part-time as a delivery driver to help pay for it. He hated it. Things had been different for Lily. The car had been repossessed a few months earlier because she could not make the payments on her own. She had to learn how to take the bus. She had 2 jobs now, one at a coffee shop and one in retail on weekends. It was the first time in her life that she had ever really had to budget. It was the first time she had ever had to say no to herself because she could not afford something. Then she wrote about her phone breaking the week before, completely dying. Her first thought had been that she would just ask me. Then she remembered. She sat on her bed and cried for an hour, not because she could not have a new phone, but because she finally understood what I had done for her, for all of them. I had been the person they called. I had been the one who always fixed it. They had never once stopped to think about what it was costing me. She wrote that she understood now that it was probably too little too late, but she wanted to say it. I had never been selfish. I had only been tired. She wished she had understood sooner. She signed it Lily. I read the email once, then again. The words did not trigger the anger or pain I had expected. There was no triumphant surge of "I told you so." Instead, I felt a quiet, distant sadness. Sadness for the sister she could have been. Sadness for the family we might have had if things had been different. She was not asking for forgiveness. She was not asking for money. She was just telling me. She was bearing witness to a truth she had finally been forced to see. The old me, the caretaker, the fixer, would have replied immediately. She would have offered comfort, told Lily it was okay, maybe even offered to help. Lily's pain would have been a call to action I had been conditioned to answer. But I was no longer that person. I sat there for a long time, watching rain streak down the window pane. Her understanding was a gift, but it was a gift I no longer needed. My peace was no longer contingent on her validation. My reality did not require her signature for approval. I had already approved it myself. To reply would be to reopen a door I had fought so hard to close. It would be an invitation to more conversation, more entanglement, and I had finally, blessedly untangled myself. My healing did not require me to participate in her newfound awareness. My forgiveness did not need an audience. With a quiet click, I moved the email into a folder I named Archive. I did not delete it, but I did not leave it in my inbox either. It was part of the story, a final chapter, but not one that required a response. Then I stood up and walked to the kitchen to make tea. A small, genuine smile touched my lips. I forgave her. In the quiet of my own heart, I forgave her, not for her, but for me. It was a silent, personal act of letting go the final cinder of resentment, turning to ash. It was a forgiveness she would never hear about, just as my pain had been a sacrifice she had never seen. And that felt perfectly peacefully balanced. If you have ever been the forgotten child, the one who gave until there was nothing left, hear me clearly. You do not owe anyone your peace just because they share your blood. You can walk away without slamming the door. You can leave everything behind and still come out whole. Because sometimes the quietest revenge is not anger or shouting. Sometimes it is finally living a life they cannot take credit for. If you have ever been told to stay silent, to settle for less, or to keep paying your way into love, this story is for you. Hit like if you have ever been underestimated. Subscribe for more stories where silence becomes strength. And tell me in the comments, would you have left or stayed?